Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today on a point of privilege, and it's a fairly complex matter, but I know you're familiar with the essence of it, and I'll attempt to be succinct. It's a point of privilege under Standing Order Section 41, Sub 1, in that I believe sincerely, having lived through this for the last 2.5 years, that a process that's been undertaken by motions in committee is impeding my ability to fully represent my constituents and to fully do my job. And that is a matter of privilege, and I appeal to you, Mr. Speaker, to refer the matter to the Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs so it can be dealt with there. Let me start with some beginning very clear principles, because all of this emanates from my role as a member of a political party recognized under the Elections Act, but with fewer than 12 members elected here, and thus falling under a different category of rights and privileges than other members of Parliament. It is, of course, a clear principle and trite to note that all Canadians are equal, all federal electoral districts are equal, then therefore representing our constituents, all members of Parliament are in theory equal, even in principle the Prime Minister, who is, as the old Latin phrase would put it, primus inter pares. He's first among equals. We are all equals here. And not to be Orwellian about it, but it's clear that since 1963, some of us are more equal than others. And while the Constitution of this country makes no reference to political parties, over time our parliamentary process here has, at the behest of larger parties, it enlarged the powers and rights of those members of Parliament who belong to one of the larger parties. Since 1963, that's when the only rule was passed that allowed additional funding to go to members of Parliament and parties with more than 12, and they are generally referred to in our rules now as recognized parties. Now, I can skip ahead on a lot of this, Mr. Speaker, and just say that until the late 1990s, there was no question as to how rules operated at report stage. Rules changed at report stage as a result of a 1999, you could call it a protest effort by an opposition party, the Alliance Party at that time. They didn't like the Nisga'a Treaty that was going through this House and put forward 700 really mischievous amendments at report stage. They weren't substantive. They didn't change the way the treaty would work. They weren't designed to work. They were designed to clog up the system. And of course, it's always been the Speaker's role, and I won't take too much of your time, Mr. Speaker, on some precedents, but it's well understood that the Speaker has the responsibility of protecting those members of Parliament and our personal rights, while also ensuring that Parliament itself can function properly. So I take you to a ruling of March 29, 2007, where Speaker Milliken wrote, quote, "The Speaker must remain ever mindful of the first principles of our great parliamentary tradition, principles best described by John George Boroneau, clerk of this House from 1890 to 1902, who described these principles thus, quote, to protect the minority and restrain the improvidence and tyranny of the majority, to secure the transaction of public business in a decent and orderly manner, to enable every member to express his opinions within those limits necessary to preserve decorum and prevent an unnecessary waste of time, to give full opportunity for the consideration of every measure, and to prevent any legislative action being taken heedlessly or upon sudden impulse." Your predecessor, former Speaker Scheer, commented similarly on the responsibility of the Speaker on May 29, 2013, quote, "An unquestionable duty of the Speaker is to act as the guardian of the rights and privileges of the members and of this House as an institution." In balancing this, Mr. Speaker, I turn to a ruling of former Speaker Fraser, April 14, 1987, and he said, quote, "The principle of protecting minorities from majority tyranny, applicable in a number of contexts exceeding the normal interpretation of government opposition, can surely be applied here. It should also be noted that where the Speaker has ruled in favour of protecting minorities, he tends to do so in the context of protecting their ability to hold the government to account, so long as it isn't at the expense of the government completing its business in a reasonably timely fashion." Speaker Fraser also, on a different occasion in 1990, spoke about the reality of how members of parties such as the Green Party, or in this House, the Bloc, or any independent members are treated. And Speaker Fraser noted this in denying a request from the Bloc Québécois to receive additional research funding when it fell below 12 seats. The Speaker said, quote, "It is important to note that the decision does not mean that the members in this group are impeded from full participation in the work of the House, or that they are deprived of support necessary to represent their constituents adequately." So we're in a different situation, Mr. Speaker. I recognize that. But I have to say that what occurred as a result of that Nisga'a Treaty report stage protest in 1999, it took several years for the House Committee on Procedure and House Affairs to amend the standing rules and change the process by which bills go through at report stage. And the rules were changed such that members of parties with more than 12 members, having had an opportunity through their parties at committee stage, could not take basically another kick at the can and come back and repeat committee process at report stage. So that process changed report stage through the House on Procedure, House Affairs. We ended up having to change the standing rules around report stage. That took, as I said, a couple of years. When I became a member of Parliament and reading through O'Brien and Bosk, our Bible here, I realized that since I wasn't in a party of more than 12 MPs, I did have the right to make these motions at report stage, these amendments. Well, Mr. Speaker, I have to say the practical application of that was not that it was an opportunity that I welcomed. It's very clear that in fully representing my constituents, they are interested in everything. There's not just one category of issue that interests my constituents. They're interested in all the bills that go through this place, and they want me to represent them on all the bills. You can only have one time that a bill, only one bill at a time, can be at report stage, but many bills at a time can be in different committees going through clause by clause. What the previous administration did, Mr. Speaker, and this is the crux of this, and I'll try to be brief, the previous government decided that since the Speaker couldn't deny me my rights at report stage unless so-called opportunities were created elsewhere, a motion was passed through every committee through a period of time that said that I would be given, and other members in small parties, 48 hours notice before clause by clause to submit all my amendments in that period. And then to come to committee, but I was not equal at committee. I didn't move my amendments at committee. They were deemed moved, could make brief comments. The practical application of this motion is that I've had to run occasionally from committees meeting simultaneously, doing clause by clause. I've had times when I've had to prepare my amendments to a bill when the witnesses for the bill are still testifying and new issues arise, but I don't have an opportunity to submit amendments based on testimony that's come in if it's 48 hours between my deadline and when the committee moves to clause by clause. In other words, it's impractical, unworkable, and prejudicial to my rights. But my main point here today, Mr. Speaker, because I've canvassed the unfairness of these motions in the previous Parliament to the previous Speaker in the 41st Parliament. But it's very clear now that these same motions, identically worded, have been pushed through every single committee once again, that what we have here is another issue. It's always been the case, and it's trite to say, it's found in O'Brien and Bosk and many other rulings by speakers, which I will not trespass on your time to read back to you, that committees are the masters of their own process. But this process is a fraud. The committees are no more the masters of this process than I'm the master of their process. They all received identical motions. They received them in the Conservative administration and dutifully passed them. Now they've received them from the government House Leader, and the government whip followed up to make sure that these motions were passed. If what it does is it is supplanting the job of the Committee on Procedure and House Affairs by amending the rules by which bills go through this House through the fiction that each committee has acted independently to come up with this rule that treats members of Parliament who are independents or parties of fewer than 12 differently. If the House Committee on Procedure and House Affairs wishes to review how a report stage should be run, then that's where that work should be done. It's very clear under many precedents that a committee cannot exceed its jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, committees passing motions identical each to the other with forced votes of government members is no more the committee being the master of its destiny than it is the case that they are actually coming up with these motions independently in each committee. They are supplanting the role of the Committee on Procedure and House Affairs and impeding on my rights. So, Mr. Speaker, as many members of Parliament through Parliament tradition have done through the generations, I appeal to you, Mr. Speaker, to find the right balance, to protect the rights of MPs in smaller parties, to ensure that bills go through this House expeditiously, but that members of Parliament are not denied their rights, nor that we allow a backdoor procedure to receive approval in this place, which is literally supplanting the role of the Committee on House and Procedure Affairs.